Hello there and good evening. You join me from this creepy loft where we're going to be telling some spooky tales. We have some non-fiction again from Ghosts and Legends of the Black Country, Staffordshire. We also have some fiction to cover, secondly. But first, let's have a little look at a place called Hanford in the West Midlands, and this tale is called A Grey Shape and a Musty Smell. So let's begin. Vicky Evitt has always been conscious of a strange atmosphere in the front room of her house in Hanford since moving in 10 years ago. There was a disturbing feeling of being watched, accompanied by a musty, almost fishy smell. The house is an otherwise normal detached one, built in the 1920s. One night, as she was walking from the bathroom to the bedroom, she saw a grey shape in front of her. It looked quite tangible, but when Vicky put out her hands to touch it, there was nothing there. She says that her feelings about this inexplicable event are those of curiosity, not of fear. Vicky's 22-year-old son Robin has taken a photograph of the garden. When the picture was developed, the family were amazed to find that the same grey shape could be seen standing on top of the garden steps. Then, in late 1993, Robin was writing up a report on his visit to a stone circle site. He's a keen student of stone circles and the rituals that were once enacted there. It was about 10 p.m. when Robin became aware of the musty smell and had a feeling that some invisible presence was standing behind him. Suddenly, their cat shot off the chair and ran from the room. Robin admits that the hairs on the back of his neck were standing on edge by this time. He telephoned a friend who is interested in psychic phenomena, and she advised him to leave the house for a while. Robin decided to follow her advice and went for a walk. When he returned, the room and the cat were back to normal. He now wonders whether the subject he was studying, the rituals associated with stone circle sites, could have triggered the events of that night. Right. We have a tale here. Let's have a look. Looking for a specifically spooky one. This story is from an area in the Midlands called Tixall, Tixall, and the tale is How Did I Get Here? Stranded in Rugeley one summer evening in 1990, Tony decided to walk to Stafford, taking the route through Little and Great Haywood. He had been hoping that he might manage to hitch a lift, but at 12:30 a.m. he was still walking. Logically, he should have been in the village of Tixall, on the road that passes the church, but at this point he became utterly confused. The road under his feet simply disappeared, and he suddenly found himself amongst the gravestones of Tixall Church, but surrounded by the trees of a dense wood. Tony knew the area reasonably well, and he was aware that there is no wood in that locality. He was understandably frightened and admits that he ran for dear life. Then, just as suddenly, he found himself back on the road to Stafford and continued his journey in a state of some puzzlement and shock. Tony has been back to Tixall with his girlfriend Jackie, but they have been unable to find anywhere that resembles the wood he discovered in the middle of the night in 1990. Wherever it was he found himself that summer night, Tony and Jackie are convinced that it isn't a location that still exists in the late 20th century. Talking to a lady who used to live in Tixall, Jackie discovered that other people have had similar experiences, seeming to go back in time to the Tixall of an earlier era. And that's How Did I Get Here from Tixall, which is probably about 9 or 10 miles from here. I was of course once a resident of Rugeley. Okay, and not too far from Rugeley we have the town of Burntwood, close to Hanford. This tale, or this story, is called Hide and Seek with a Ghost. In 1934, when Ivan Vinnell was 12, he and a group of friends had been playing a long-range game of hide and seek one evening. He and one companion became fed up as they had seen nothing of the others for some time. The two boys decided to make their way slowly and quietly along the road to their base on the local green. When they saw a figure emerge from the thick hedge on the right, their immediate thought was that they'd been spotted. However, the figure proved to be a very tall man, accompanied by a dog, which looked black in the half moonlight. He walked across the road right in front of them, then passed through the hedge on their left. It wasn't an illusion, because we both saw it at the same time, Ivan emphasises. The two boys returned to the spot in the full light the next day, but neither of them could work out how the man and the dog could have passed through the dense hedges. When Ivan left school, he went to work in Lichfield and therefore had to use this road every day. He admits that he always felt a sense of unease when he reached the spot where he'd seen the ghostly figure, though he never saw it again. However, Ivan later told his uncle about the incident. He was amazed when his uncle told him that as a young man he'd seen the same figure with a dog several times. On the first occasion, the man had passed close to him. He'd been so scared that he'd struck out with his walking stick, only to find that his stick had passed right through the figure. Needless to say, this did nothing to allay his fears. He subsequently saw the ghost on several occasions, and Ivan has met other older residents of the area who also say that they have encountered exactly the same figure. The location of the sightings has always been the same, on the road from Woodhouses to Burntwood, close to Burntwood Hospital. Ivan is now 72, but his memory of the ghostly figure is always as vivid as the night he saw it 60 years ago. There is a row of lime trees on the left, he reports, and a holly tree on the right. He calculates that sightings of the ghost go back at least 100 years. Okay, that's 3 from this one here by David Bell. Let's have a little look at bringing you some fiction. Let's go with more night frights. Have a little look at the contents. Right. We have The Bogey, page 41. Have they told you about the Bogey yet? Geoffrey felt his body tense. Kenny's whispering voice was so close to his ear that it sounded like a snake hissing. Kenny slept in the bunk next to his, and their heads were only inches apart. "Be quiet," Geoffrey whispered back. "I'm trying to sleep." "You don't know about him, do you?" Kenny sounded determined to talk, even though it was against the rules after lights out. "So what if I don't?" Geoffrey said. "It sounds like a scary story." "Listen, this is your first year at Camp Cypress," Kenny said. "You don't know half the stuff that goes on around here." Geoffrey felt the hair stand up on the back of his neck. Kenny had just made him remember the creepy feeling he'd had when he first came to Camp Cypress 4 years ago. It wasn't like the other camps he'd gone to. It was on the edge of a swamp, and it was more isolated and run down. Even his parents had looked a little nervous about leaving him. "This place used to be an old private hideout," Kenny said in a low voice. "If you look around, you can find old coins and things." Geoffrey lay in the darkness, breathing in and out nervously. He knew Kenny was going to tell him about the Bogey, even if he didn't want to hear it. "About 200 years ago," Kenny went on, "a pirate named Captain Bogey made his hideout here. He buried the treasure he'd stolen from hundreds of ships. But his first mate double-crossed him. He shot Captain Bogey and stole the treasure. The captain slowly bled to death, but before he died he vowed that his ghost would come back for revenge. And that's the Bogey. He still wanders through the swamp at night, carrying his knife, and he's still looking for revenge. Geoffrey lay in the darkness, listening to his heart pound. He knew the story about the Bogey couldn't be true, but still, he didn't like to think about it. The trees around Camp Cypress were so dark and thick, and every night the counsellor of their cabin, Peter, made one of the campers go out into the middle of the night and get one of the charred logs from the camp bonfire, just to prove he wasn't afraid to do it. Of the boys in the cabin, 4 had already gone. That left only Kenny and himself for tonight. As Geoffrey lay there in the dark, he heard Peter clear his throat from across the cabin. A nervous chill ran down his spine. That's what Peter always did just before he woke everybody up for the nightly test. The coward test, he called it. Ready to go tonight? Kenny whispered in Geoffrey's ear with a snicker. It's either you or me, and I already did it last year. Geoffrey felt the nervous twinge in the pit of his stomach begin to spread throughout his body. He told himself that Kenny's story was just a joke, but the idea of Bogey had begun to grow real in his mind. It's time for the test, Peter suddenly called out, in his low voice that had an edge of meanness to it. Geoffrey heard the rest of the boys in the cabin groan and yawn. Everybody was getting used to Peter's trick of waking them up, but you still didn't like it. Geoffrey, get up, Peter's voice ordered. You're taking a little walk tonight. A rush of fear shot through Geoffrey's body, leaving his arms and legs feeling weak and heavy as stone. He struggled out of his bunk and pulled on a sweatshirt and his jeans. You know what you have to do, Geoffrey. You go through the swamp to where the big bonfire was tonight. The trail is pretty dark this time of night, isn't it, guys? The voices of the 4 boys who had already done the test answered back with scary sounds. You pick up one of the charred logs from the bonfire, and then you come back here with it to prove you're not a coward. Geoffrey swallowed hard and slipped his feet into his sneakers. He knew he couldn't refuse to go. That would brand him as a coward for the rest of the time he was at camp. As he headed for the door, Peter hissed in a low voice, "Don't let Bogey get you." Geoffrey stepped out onto the dark path that led away from the cabin to the bonfire site. He could hear the croaking of the frogs from the swamp, and in the distance he could see the other cabins of the camp. He wondered if any of the campers in the other cabins had to do the test, or was it just Peter's sick idea? Geoffrey squinted into the darkness ahead of him, trying to make out the trail through the dark trees. There was only a thin slither of a moon to guide him, and he began to grope his way in the dark, feeling the trees along the side of the narrow path. A sudden sound made Geoffrey freeze in his tracks. It came again, a soft, scuffling noise from behind him. an animal, he told himself. He started down the path again, moving more quickly, trying to escape the sound that padded along behind him. But it kept following him, not sounding like an animal anymore. It sounded like the Bogey. The soggy earth of the trail suddenly came to an end at the bonfire, and Geoffrey rushed over to the cold embers. He felt around until he found one of the charred logs, and then he heard the soft thud of footsteps behind him. He clutched the log in his hands and jumped up, sensing the presence of something only inches away. He whirled around and began to run back down the trail to the cabin. But the footsteps found him in the dark and followed closely behind like evil shadows. Through the panic in his mind, Geoffrey thought about the sound of the footsteps. The sound was muffled and soft. They came after him, slowly closing the distance between them, no matter how fast he ran. Don't let the Bogey get you. Peter's words raced through Geoffrey's mind with every breath he took. Geoffrey knew he was close to the cabin now, but the footsteps were close to him too. Then, with a sickening feeling, Geoffrey heard something slice through the air behind him. An intense pain cut through his back, once, twice, and he almost crumpled to the ground. But fear made him stagger on until finally he reached the cabin door. He stumbled into the cabin and dropped the log on the floor, panting like a wild animal that had escaped its predator. Flashlights flickered on, piercing the darkness with beams of light. Geoffrey stood still in shock as the boys came out of their bunks. "The Bogey," he whispered. "It chased me." Peter laughed, and then Kenny. "There's no such thing as the Bogey, you fool," Peter said. "That was just a story to scare you." "The Bogey got me," Geoffrey gasped. Then his knees buckled and he dropped forward onto the floor in a faint. The other boys gathered around and shone their flashlights down onto his fallen body. And then they saw it. On his back were 2 slashes in the form of an X, marked by Captain Bogey. So, I hope you enjoyed those spooky delights. I'm sure I can bring you more in the near future. Sleep well.